5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You have to be the one that's willing to take the first risk, right? If you're always just thinking like, oh, somebody else is going to tell me about their stuff and then I'll be able to share. I don't care if you're introverted, extroverted, whatever. Like you got to be the one. It's leadership 101. You got to be the one to take the first step. And you realize that you might take some heat for that, or people might discount you. But at the same time, I found that the more authentically humble and real I am, the more we can actually talk about stuff that matters. Because nobody really wants to just talk about their job all the time, because it's not all of who we are. It's just a part of who we are.
Welcome back to another inspiring episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle podcast. Today's guest is the director of Envision. Envision is a ministry that identifies and develops missional leaders who innovate, establish, and strengthen communities of faith in key urban environments. Envision does this through short-term trips, internships, leadership development, and more. Dr. Tim Meier serves providing oversight for the Envision office team in Colorado Springs, as well as over 20 sites and teams around the world. Tim and his wife, Rachel, have been married for 15 years. Tim loves to play with his two boys, eat sushi, watch Cleveland sports, and go for runs on the beautiful Colorado trails. So, Tim, welcome to the show. Excited to speak with you today.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. So, Tim, we usually start out the show with a favorite success quote or a saying you live by. So share with the audience what you got and what it means to you.
Yeah, for me, the thing that is in my head, helping people become who they're meant to be. For me, that also has, faith ramifications of, becoming who God has designed them to be, becoming fulfilled in their lives, but really figuring out why they're on the planet and then leaving the planet a better place. So really, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that success to me is if more and more people around me are becoming who they're meant to be, I feel like we're doing something right.
Tim, go ahead and share a brief background of how you got to where you are today and what that journey looked like for you. I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah. So, I went to college as an English lit major. I just kind of wanted to read books and maybe teach about them. And then halfway through college, I had done some internships at a church and started considering like what it would look like to kind of do church stuff, but I really didn't know. So my wife and I got married right out of college, and it's actually been 16 years. We just celebrated 16 years of marriage, and we moved to the East Coast. Thank you. And we moved to the East Coast. So I did a master's program basically to buy myself some time to figure out, like, did I really want to do the church thing as a pastor or as a leader there, or did I want to teach or do something else? And so really throughout that journey, studying in New York, and then I did go on staff at a church for 5 years. It was confirmed, like, this is the next step for us. But then in 2008, we moved to France as kind of a crazy invitation to go start something new in the southwest part of France with our denomination called the Christian Missionary Alliance. And we were supposed to start a young adult kind of thing in Toulouse. And then we got there and the whole thing blew up. And then we ended up moving to Paris. It didn't work for a lot of reasons, staffing, a lot of resistance. It was a very difficult time personally for us. We lost some babies through miscarriages and all kinds of things. And so that was really difficult. But we got to Paris and then and things were good for a few years and things went well. We came back to the States sort of on a hiatus break time.
How old were you at this point?
I was 32. So we were 27, 28 when we moved to France and was 32 when I moved back to the States. And then this Envision thing came on the radar about 6-8 months later, and we really struggled because we loved living in France. Our second child was born there. Our first one was bilingual at the time. We loved the life in Paris, to be honest, and things were going really well in terms of the things that we had started and working with the church and everything there. But we really sensed that the next challenge was going to be with Envision. But Envision was this like little startup kind of thing within a larger organization. And so there were all kinds of challenges there. But at that time, I oversaw all of our international. So we had locations in 12 countries at that time. I oversaw the staff and those kind of pieces. And then just under 3 years ago, so 2.5 years ago, I moved into the overall director, kind of the executive director role for Envision, overseeing all of our operations and all that kind of stuff.
Go ahead and share with us what your position at Envision has been like, and share about Envision itself.
Well, I love the purpose of this podcast for young leaders and entrepreneurs, because I definitely have felt out of my depth a ton, because I'm still a young guy, and I guess I'm less young than I was when I started this thing, but it's been a challenge in the sense that we have people now in 20 locations around the world. We have 75 worldwide staff plus the national office staff, and we have about 4,000 people that run through those locations, whether it's a short-term trip or internship or something. So really, my position with Envision is to ensure that vision and mission stays on point, that everything that we're doing operationally is through that lens, as well as to give oversight to the site staff around the world. But we have people who are primarily giving operational kind of oversight to the domestic people and then the international people. But I work with our operations specialist here at the national office here in Colorado as well. And I also interface with our other branches within the organization of the Christian Missionary Alliance, the other directors and leaders and those kind of people. So the job itself is a mix of sort of entrepreneurial vision building stuff and administrative leadership. And I'm on the road a ton. So the last 5 years, I've been on the road 120 days a year, traveling, visiting those places, speaking at conferences or other places, networking, developing strategic plans for a lot of those site locations. So that's kind of been my role.
So I'd love to hear, diving into a little bit more of an emotional state, going through that time when you were traveling internationally, more newly married with your wife, Rachel, moving to France, going through those, the turbulence of all of that in Toulouse, and then also, dealing with your family things as well. I wonder if you would share a bit about that struggle and what got you through it, and if there was people at that time who were there for you guys, helping support you, and if not, how you pulled through ultimately to bring you to a stronger and better place.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I could talk about this for hours because I think the reality of life and leadership as a young person and doing all these different things is really difficult. And actually, my last 18 to 24 months has probably been my most difficult emotionally. I'll just rewind a little bit. So like 18 months ago, I was finishing up my dissertation for my doctorate, and I was leading all of this stuff in Envision. And I kind of had I didn't have a full on nervous breakdown, but I had what my therapist calls a breaking point where emotionally I just was I don't know if I can do this. I drove home. I just sat in the car and cried in the driveway for a while. I didn't know what to do. I was just overwhelmed. It was illogical. I couldn't, my advisor was I need this Excel spreadsheet, for this stat thing changed. I need this to happen. I'm thinking about all of our employees. I'm thinking about all the stuff that I feel like God wants me to do on a very spiritual and, in that responsible level. And it felt like too much. And so really at that time when I had this kind of emotional breaking point moment, I went into more of an aggressive approach for self-care and surrounding myself with people. So, I found a good therapist counselor in town. I called my primary mentor, who actually was my mentor at the beginning of my master's program in 2003, and some other folks. And people really rallied around us in really strategic ways, which was really helpful because 5 or 6 months later, my extended family went into massive crisis. My parents went through a super ugly divorce. There was all kinds of things that were really difficult about that personally, and family fallout and all those things. And so at that time, it really was my faith in God and the spiritual rhythms and habits that I had developed over the years that sustained me personally, as well as the friendships and the communities. I mean, we just had people who were not only reaching out, but strategically leaning in terms of coming over to our place. I've been a part, I mentioned this, but I've been a part of this mentoring group. It's now become a peer mentoring group. We all started when we were in our early 20s. In 2003, we got connected through this educational thing, but we decided to keep tracking even after we had finished our master's. So we've been together for 15 years. So I flew to those guys. We all got together in Montana and we sat down for a week with no agenda and were able to really talk, process, connect together well, pray together, but also have fun together, go on hikes and all those kind of things. So emotionally for me, this is the question is a holistic question. It's about like mind, body, soul, spirit stuff. It's not just like I'm going to go and take some medication for the emotional thing without realizing that my and this is what your podcast is about, right? That this is all connected.
Yeah, the health.
Yeah, it's all that. So for me, I had to get back to some physical stuff that I had been neglecting in terms of exercise and those kind of things that I used to be big on. I had to get back to, some of my personal rhythms and stuff like that.
Thanks for sharing that, Tim.
Yeah.
What pulled you away initially? Obviously responsibilities stacking up, life happens, but you understood the importance of exercise. You understood the importance of implementing those spiritual rhythms. So what was it caused you to neglect those to that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, like a lot of us, so Ken Shigematsu is an author from Canada. He wrote a book called a new book called Survival Guide for the Soul. It just came out. And in that, he talks about being skillful and soulful, and that a lot of us who are achievers and driven and stuff like that lean way more towards skillful than we do towards soulful. And I think that's honestly what's happening. Just leaning towards being producing, being skillful. I mean, I'm a driven dude. Like, you don't do a full-time job with kids and travel and do a doctorate and all that kind of stuff. Like, I go after life, but I had neglected the soulful part of me, I think, because I just figured I could cut corners on days off. I could cut corners on these other habits that I needed because we were getting a lot done and it was exciting. And there were fun things. The weird part whenever this is happening is it's not like work is going bad when these things happen typically. Sometimes it is like you just kind of lose it because you failed so badly. But a lot of times I've seen a lot of the other young leaders I've talked to have experienced this. It's because things were cranking so much, but that maybe our gifts were taking us to a place where our character wasn't prepared to go quite yet.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's in a nutshell what was going on.
I had a guest on recently, Tim, and his name was Alan Kukshori. He used to be the manager for Novak Djokovic, who just won the U.S. Open.
Wow, yeah.
And he explained one of his favorite quotes was, I think it was J.P. Morgan, said he gets more done in 9 months than he can in 12 because he takes 3 months off. So that hit me like, I was like, what? Because I'm thinking to myself, 3 months, no, that's not going to happen.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Because you're like, I got to get it done. Let's go, and so, yeah, I align. I hear what you're saying there.
I mean, for me as a Christian, we look at the 10 Commandments as these kind of like guidelines for life. And most of them I do pretty well. Like I don't murder people and, I struggle with other ones more than others. But the one that, especially in the West, that we really have neglected is this time off, Sabbath, that basically says the world doesn't depend on me. Like I'm going to take this day off and completely unplug because fundamentally I believe that, God really is in charge of the world. But I also believe it's a risk relationally and work-wise Sabbath to take a day off to say, you know what, I'm going to stop. So if you're going to stop for 3 months, you're taking a huge risk relationally with people to say, actually develop people well enough around me that they're going to keep on going and that it's not all about me all the time. So I think the sort of Messiah complex or the superhero complex is what gets us in so much trouble.
I totally agree. Two things. One is, I like how you said guidelines because none of us hold up the 10 Commandments perfectly. That's just a given. Right. And I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yep.
And two, it is a posture of humility and faith that's required if you are going to be able to have rest. Because one of the things I didn't realize until this past year, and you're doing a lot of soul care and Enneagram work and all of that stuff.
Yep.
Big thing was the world doesn't. God told me a quote the other day when I was at a stoplight. I was almost afraid to share it because I think what it was whether you're here or not, the world's just going to stay how it's going. And that was both challenging to me as a type A personality, but then also humbling where it's like, even if you do nothing, I mean, yeah, you make a huge impact, butterfly effect, this and that. But like how we think, because we all look at the world from our lens. And so we're like, all right, here's what I have to do for these reasons. And the fact is, like you said, you have to be willing to realize that yes, you're important. The world's going to keep turning whether or not you show up. And that's just the way it is. And yeah, I agree with you.
I think there's some relief in that, right? That
totally.
That we don't know, like most of us don't even know our great grandparents' names. So like we only even our legacy only lasts so long. So I think to take the pressure off and say, okay, so how do I be present today? I'm an Enneagram 7. So like I'm super driven by all the new experiences and all the new everythings. That new and different to me is like every day is a potential for new and different, but that can get you in a lot of trouble because the new and different, if it's only seen through you, you can be your own worst enemy in that. So I agree with you.
That's powerful. Leaning into that a little bit more, with my Enneagrams, my biggest one initially was an 8. One thing about an 8 is that we're really blunt and are seen as harsh many times. And so I kind of admire that you are driven, but you're a 7 driven, because 8 drivens are wanted when they're needed. But then people ask you to kind of turn that off when it's like, in between wartime. Okay, you're not needed to battle right now, so just stop being an 8 for now. And it's like, you can't really do that. I got to read more into the Enneagram again. I was getting a lot out of that. Have you read The Road Back to You by Ian and Suzanne?
Yeah, and the best book I've ever read on Enneagram by far is The Sacred Enneagram by Christopher Hertz. That is just phenomenal on wiring. That's a book that I think, even though it's called Sacred Enneagram, even for people who wouldn't consider themselves people of faith or whatever, still could resonate deeply with, because it's really about like the deeper purposes in your life and why these things really matter, and why you matter to people, and how you approach your life and your self-leadership and all that kind of stuff is really crucial. So that's a great book.
The Sacred Enneagram. I'll have to look into that. I haven't read that one.
Great. Yep.
Jumping into the topic of isolation and or loneliness as a proactive professional and entrepreneur, how did you, I know you said you guys got connected in your earlier 20s for the last 15 years or so, but what would you recommend to somebody? I'm 27 and I don't have that. And I would love to even start that or be a part of that. And do you recommend I just try to start something like that myself, or just join something and just kind of go along for the ride? How would you recommend facilitating that?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different. I think without a person who can give you some experience coaching, like if you're going to start it yourself, I would find a mentor kind of person, and there are great resources like at colleges, universities. There are all kinds of leadership networks everywhere. And a lot of those people, we even have in our town here, the Center for Creative Leadership. In every town, there's something like this. And so I think to network with some of those people, or even just say, hey, I'd love for you to mentor me or help me understand how to create a mentoring coaching network or something like that. People love to talk about that stuff because it's the reason why a lot of these people are doing their leadership stuff in the first place. And so people are willing to give free advice on that kind of stuff more than they would on like, hey, coach me through my, how many sides is my market, or what's my 5-year business plan or whatever. I mean, I think people are much more willing to say, yeah, I'd love to help shape you. People want to be, they want to be people helpers, I think, more than we give them credit for. And so I just really I insert myself into those places. And especially in my 20s, I did. So, I mean, my recommendation not only would be to seek out maybe a mentor like that, but also there are all kinds of leadership development programs out there. Stanford does one, in a Christian venue. Arrow Leadership is an example of one of those. Touchstone. There's like tons of these where you can get in for relatively inexpensive for a couple of years. I mean, it's not free, but for a couple of years, you can get in for a few $1,000 and say, okay, I'm going to connect with a lot of other people who are super driven like me. And you look around the room and you're like, oh, all these people, wow, they think about the world like me. This is amazing. So I think one of those leadership development things. But then in my town, I meet networkers or connectors through other people because I show up at events like openings, or a friend opens a business and you show up to the like gala or the night thing and all these other people are there, and then you start meeting other people. And tonight at my house, actually, I'm going to have 6 guys over, and all of those guys except for one I've really met through those circles, like networking circles. One guy's a local CEO in town. One guy works for the Chamber of Commerce. One guy is one of the primary like coffee shop owner kind of guys in town, and we become really good friends now beyond just those things. And so showing up in those places, even if you're not an extrovert, and meeting people, not just to use them, but to actually become friends with them because you can add value to their lives and they can add value to yours, is crucial. Like it is, I think isolation is the greatest enemy to us in business, in work, in ministry, in everything, because we begin to listen to lies about ourselves from ourselves or from external things because we're just reading books or we're just not able to really view the world correctly. So community and taking risks outside of isolation is so crucial in your 20s especially, but also into your 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever.
Well said. Yeah, pressing into that, Rob Reimer, when you have been burned in community, the only way to heal from that, I think this is what he said, is to be healed in community.
That's right.
To me, I was like, that's very profound because I, grew up as a pastor's kid. And again, I'm so grateful for all that went with that in shaping me. And from my perspective, I know that's not how the world is, but from my own self-centered perspective, I'm grateful for the experience. However, you do learn to be very analytical and unfortunately you can become judgmental and incredibly cynical. So working through those wounds and healing and forgiving and learning to be a better person myself, how then can I, once I go out and put myself out there, go support other people and just give and love people, would you recommend, I found that sharing your woundedness is a great way to connect with people, showing each other your wounds when there's a consensus, not in a manipulative, spill out everything, spill your guts all the time type of thing, but in a safe environment. Let's say if it was more of a quiet study or get together time, what's a way to facilitate the development of relationships? Do you have to just be willing to constantly kind of throw out that metaphorical tennis ball of here's my wounds, let's see how they handle it, and let a bunch of people whack it until like person number 4 says, yeah, okay, we actually connect. Let's stay connected. How does that work? Because I'm having trouble with that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think there's a perfect science, but I think you're onto something with transparency and vulnerability. So Rob and I are really good friends. You referenced Rob a couple of times. So Dr. Rob Reimer and Rob always, we've talked a lot about the difference between transparency and vulnerability. Transparency for an emerging generation is a high value, like just say all your stuff, right? Like share your wounds, your baggage, your issues, all that kind of stuff. But vulnerability actually says you have power to speak into my life. And I'm going to give you not only these tidbits of information about me, but I'm actually going to give you power to be in those moments rather than just telling you about them. And I think really that's part of the key in relationship is to say, how willing am I to actually like live life with someone and let them in? And they could do that for me and I could do that for them. But yeah, I mean, even one of the guys who's coming tonight, we had lunch a couple of weeks ago. We're actually new friends. We had lunch a couple of weeks ago. It was a business lunch. We were talking about networking and we kind of started picking up on each other's stories that maybe they were similar growing up. And so I just took a risk and said, look, dude, I'm just going to tell you my journey. And then he was like, whoa, this is very similar to my journey. And then we became really good friends in the moment. So I think you have to be the one that's willing to take the first risk, right? If you're always just thinking like, oh, somebody else is going to tell me about their stuff and then I'll be able to share. I don't care if you're introverted, extroverted, whatever. Like you got to be the one. It's leadership 101. You got to be the one to take the first step. And you realize that you might take some heat for that or people might discount you. But at the same time, I found that the more authentically humble and real I am, the more we can actually talk about stuff that matters. Because nobody really wants to just talk about their job all the time because it's not all of who we are. It's just a part of who we are. In fact, when that becomes all of who we are, that's probably another sign that we're headed for disaster. But yeah, so I think taking those risks and cultivating those community spaces where we actually do have time for coffee and lunch and other things. Most of us think that we're too busy for all that, but that's just that has to be a part of our life and journey.
Yeah, I'm just kind of letting that sink in a bit. All right, great. So we did talk a little bit about isolation there and some approaches. There's no exact science. It's funny. I was watching a movie. Basically, there was like a mentor mentoring a mentee, and he shared with him something to the effect like, you want to know how to do everything. Instead of that, why don't you just start trying and put in some work, like actually put in some practice where you're attempting, and that's how you'll learn the wisdom instead of just, and I was challenged by that. I was like, yeah, there's something to be said for preparing, but there's also something to be said for faith, bravery, and courage, and just going for it. So
that's right. Absolutely.
Tim, let's jump into the Heart Healthy Hustle round. I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. So are you ready for the Heart Healthy Hustle round?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. So for the first category, again, it's heart. So what activity or activities, plural, do you use to care for and strengthen your internal character?
Yeah. So every morning I journal. I do read some scripture, and I sit in silence for a while. So I've learned over the last couple of years the necessity of me taking like 2 10-minute or more breaks in silence. It's a very spiritual, meditative moment for me, but it's really important for me to center both on who God is, but also on my life. So I have a whole like rhythm of life sort of thing in the heart area where there's certain practices, habits, whatever, that keep me focused and keep me healthy. And so, the silence, the meditation, breaks in work for that, Sabbath, all those kind of things, prayer, those kind of things keep my heart healthy.
Love that. So I was reading a book, and I know there are whole books on this topic itself. The book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzero.
Yeah. Yep.
In the end of that, he talks about the rule of life that he lives by.
Exactly.
So are you speaking kind of in terms of that, like having a daily office and all of that stuff?
Yeah, totally. So Pete's book, again, Ken Shigematsu wrote another book called God and My Everything. You have tons of resources like that these days that are, a rule of life, kind of a rhythm, a pattern of the way that we organize ourselves, because otherwise we all have habits. Like something will always dictate our behavior. So we have to intentionally choose those. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Love it. Intentionally choose a healthy rhythm to implement.
That's right.
Right on. So health, how do you maintain your physical health and avoid burnout with all you do? Having a family, career moving forward?
Yeah. So, I used to be a big runner, like a marathoner kind of guy in my late 20s, early 30s. And I did neglect some of that. But so for me, running is easier than some other things. So some people hate running. They're like, I would never do that. But for me to stay healthy, like I got to run about 25 to 30 miles a week, which means, 4 or 5 days out there, early mornings or whenever, to maintain that. I have to do that. My wife knows that. I become a difficult human being if I don't have that time. I really am committed now to resting. So, turning off my phone at a certain time of night, or just going off the grid for a weekend in between major life transitions or whatever, I'll take a full week off. And I used to never take vacations or anything because that was for the week and all that stuff. And now I actually do. So I think part of it is like really resting. And when I'm on the road, so if I'm in the middle of like a 10-day trip, I'll just build in like an evening off or a morning here or whatever, just to actually rest and get the physical kind of part of it too.
That's quite a few miles. I know there are people who run more, but I don't run at all. So that's, wow. That's like a lot of miles. So.
Well, but it'll average to like 45 minutes 4 or 5 times a day, 4 or 5 times a week. Okay. So extra, just think of it like a little under an hour for 4 to 5 days a week. That's what I need.
That's awesome. So what's your main motivation for doing what you do? Why, in other words, why is it not even an option for you to not go to the max of your potential?
So for me, this is fundamentally spiritual. Like I really believe that God has a plan and purpose for people and for the world. And so for me, I really do believe that I'm on the planet for a reason, and that by neglecting, it's sort of that old, Steve Prefontaine quote in the 70s, another big runner guy, like to do less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And so I think for me to do less than my absolute best every moment is to sacrifice the invitation that God's given me or the gifts that he's given me. But I think the main motivation is that I really truly believe that nothing in the world is neutral. Like nothing is just there. It's either positively moving towards God and health and wholeness, or away from it. And so I feel like if I'm not hustling 100%, then I'm moving towards, because it's not neutral, it's moving towards the negative somewhere, whether it's about me or I'm not contributing to people or society or my children or whatever.
What do you think some of the strengths and weaknesses of that point of view would be for type A personality types?
Yeah, so I think the real weakness is that you internalize tons of pressure. And that you think like, I've got to do this, like God's depending on me. Oh, if I don't do my best, like all this kind of stuff. But the strength is that everything can have good meaning. So when I'm resting with my kids or playing with my kids, that's not a neutral activity. That's a positive activity. So I think that the positive or the strength of it is to see meaning in all things and potential goodness in all things. But the weakness is, again, it can just become about you. And I think the reality is there's a much bigger story that's being told all the time. It's not my story. This is a much bigger story. But to have an opportunity to play a part in that with all the strength and intentionality that I can is an honor and is exciting to me. So that's my motivation. The strength of this is that you don't just see people as byproducts in your quest for success or something. Like, people are innately valuable. They're made in God's image. People are not just a means to an end. And so I think if you can see meaning and then you go, okay, this is part of my life, is to take a step away and connect with this person, invest in them, that kind of thing. But again, the weakness, always the dark side, is that somehow unhealthily this becomes about you, and everybody's wired differently. So the outcome of that is always different. But I think the same tendency is there, that you would, the original sin, right, is the temptation to be God or to know all of the things. And you don't have to know all the things or to be responsible for all of this stuff. But if we neglect our responsibility, then we're sacrificing the gift or the invitation.
Yeah, the freedom in responsibility as well.
Absolutely.
So I love that there's also a restorative rest that comes with spending time doing wholesome things. Your example with spending time with your children and your wife, that, do I understand you correctly in that?
Yes.
That's, I know for, a lot of us entrepreneurs that we kind of know that, but it's for some, it's hard to accept that actually is incredibly necessary and really what life is all about, of course. But sometimes, like you said, one of the weaknesses could be we get a little bit too focused on ourselves or too focused on the goal as opposed to, the journey.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, you're exactly right. Those practices actually are restorative. I used to think that they were more of a drain, to be honest. That sounds horrible, but I used to think like, oh man, like now I got to hang out with my kids or whatever. Just because you're so focused on accomplishing or on the goal or whatever. But now, instead of just, because we all make excuses for ourselves, like we're willing to binge on the TV thing or Netflix or whatever to kind of restore ourselves, or we're willing to do whatever else it is. But most of the time, those things are not restorative practices. They're just leaving us even more frustrated. So figuring out what actually restores and gives life is really key.
Powerful, powerful. Tim, let's share with the audience your 3 most influential books and why.
Yeah, I saw this question ahead of time. This is a really hard one for me. I love to read. So I would say just my current ones. Number 1 would be Heifetz's book, Leadership on the Line. It was a Harvard business book, Leadership on the Line. I teach on this actually in a doctoral program now. And I actually have some of his key takeaways printed out and on a picture in my office, so that every time I pick up a call or have an email or something, I'm reminded. Stuff like give the work back to the people, get up on the balcony so you're not just imprisoned on the dance floor all the time. You got to see the bigger picture.
Nice.
Hear the song beneath the words. There's people are saying things, but there's actually usually a song. And is that song in dissonance? Is it playing along positively with what they're saying, or is there some dissonance there? Like try to read between the lines, basically. And so all his stuff, I think, is really strong on giving really great wisdom and insight on leadership, but also on humility, on empowerment of other people, all that kind of stuff. So I really recommend that book. The second one is Stephen Covey Jr.'s book, Speed of Trust. I love that book. It's been a recent one for me. I know it's like 10 years old, but that's been a recent read for me. And I think just understanding the trust dynamics in relationship and work, realizing that you can actually develop trust better and well with people, and how to empower people. His definition of leadership in that book is leadership is about accomplishing things while inspiring trust. And I think that's a good definition. I think there's a million definitions of leadership, but the idea of we're getting stuff done, but we're getting it done together, not just I'm getting it done and then see you later, but we're accomplishing these things together. And then the third book I would probably say is Rob's book, Soul Care. I really believe that, these deep issues of our souls about who we are as people, the lies that we believe or don't believe, all the freedom that we can get from those cyclical patterns in our heads is so crucial. So, I've given that book out to tons of people. I know Rob's printed 30,000 copies now, but that one really has been meaningful to me as a person and also as I lead other people.
3 heavy-hitting books. I got to add the first 2 to my list. I have a copy of Rob's on my bookshelf. Fantastic. Cool. Yeah, you're being so proactive. How do you stay organized? Like, what are some of your maybe favorite tech tools or software that you use or recommend using?
Maybe everybody uses the same things, but I use Asana for project management stuff. I actually use this little weekly planning grid that is both online and a printed out that you can find modifications for, but it basically asks the questions, what's the big events of the week? What are my crucial meetings? What day am I actually taking off? What day is going to require the most energy? What do I need to plan for the week ahead? What do I plan for next month? And so I do that every Monday morning and chart that out. And then you have, blocks for all of your morning, afternoon, evening, extra kind of stuff. And what's the purpose of those days? And then you can manage that on Asana through project management. I use Todoist just for the to-do list kind of thing. And I have a little notebook with me, old school, analog, that, I'm making notes on. But those are probably the main things that I use.
And so, Tim, in conclusion of the show, I would love to ask you the park bench paradigm. If you could go back in time, you could see yourself, your younger self, in a dark time or a really hard, trying time in your 20s, and you saw him sitting on a park bench, and you were out at the park, your present day Tim, walking in the park alone, and you could go and sit down on the bench, put your hand on your own shoulder, what would you tell yourself and why?
Yeah, I would say slow down. I would say you need to learn to calm the internal torque that has you just completely, speeding ahead and not seeing people around you or even seeing yourself, and realize that this is the long game. This isn't the short game. This isn't about what you can accomplish in the next 3 months or 6 months or a year. This is about what you'll accomplish and who you'll be over the long term. And then I would end with that who you are is way more important than what you do. And so the person that you are and the person that you're becoming should require intentionality and development as much as the skills that you're learning and what you want to produce for yourself and for people. So becoming more of a holistic, slow down, see the big picture, healthy person, honestly, is what I would say.
Do you think you would listen to your own advice?
I think I would listen. I would have listened a little bit if somebody who I trusted a great deal, who was in a similar life state as me, was saying that stuff to me. I think I was hearing that from people in their 60s or 70s, and I was like, yeah, what do you know? And I think I was ignorant and arrogant. I think I would have listened a little bit more if people would have been proactively saying that stuff to me. Yeah.
Cool. That's good to know. I'm happy to hear that. And thank you for sharing that, Tim.
Absolutely.
Dr. Tim Meier, how can my audience connect with you further and keep in touch with you? And what's something exciting for you currently on your journey? What's getting you out of bed in the morning right now?
Yeah, well, to connect further, I'm on Twitter, Tim Meier, one word, Instagram, all those kind of places. Our website for Envision is weareenvision.com. But actually today I'm announcing on the Facebook and other things that I'm actually moving into a new role within our organization as vice president for development. And so there's a lot of big challenges ahead for communications and marketing and all those kind of things. And so all of these things that I've been saying to you today are good reminders to myself as I kind of move into it. Frankly, like I know in a couple of weeks when I officially take that new job that I'm going to be torqued and want to work way too much and neglect some of these things. And so these are actually good reminders, but that's what's exciting on the table today.
Tim, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you for listening to the Heart Healthy Hustle podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I want to say thank you. And also, I want you to ask yourself why. What about this episode really stood out to you? I want to challenge you to take action on that thing. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate your time and consideration to go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, so it really helps the podcast grow and we can impact even more people who need this. Thank you guys for all of your support, and I will see you in the next episode.